A street child with an unusual gift connects with a deaf maid through sign language. What seemed like a simple act of kindness catches the eye of a reclusive millionaire and sets off a chain of events no one could have foreseen. Before we start, I'd like to know your opinion about this video when you finish watching. You can leave a simple comment below. Please like this video and follow our channel for more content. The bitter Chicago wind cut through Emma's thin jacket like ice daggers as she huddled behind the dumpster of Romano's Italian restaurant. At 7 years old, she had learned to make herself invisible on these harsh October nights. Her small hands trembled as she clutched the half-eaten sandwich she'd found in the trash, her stomach growling with a hunger that had become her constant companion for the past 6 months since her grandmother died. Through the restaurant's back window, she could see families laughing over steaming plates of pasta, their faces warm in the golden light. Emma pressed her nose against the cold glass, imagining what it would feel like to sit at one of those tables, to belong somewhere again. A sudden commotion near the kitchen entrance caught her attention. A woman in a black uniform was frantically gesturing with her hands, tears streaming down her face. She moved her fingers in rapid, desperate patterns that Emma didn't understand, but the panic in her eyes was universal. "Please, please," the woman seemed to be saying, though no words came from her lips. She pointed toward the street, then back to herself, her movements becoming more frantic by the second. Emma had never seen anyone communicate this way before, but something deep in her chest told her this woman needed help. Without thinking, she crawled out from behind the dumpster and approached the distressed stranger. The woman noticed Emma and immediately knelt down, her hands moving even faster now. Tears continued to flow as she pointed repeatedly in different directions, her face a mask of desperation. Emma might not understand sign language, but she understood fear. She had felt it every night on the streets, every time someone looked at her with disgust, every time she wondered if she'd find food or shelter. Gently, Emma took the woman's shaking hands and held them still. She looked directly into her eyes and nodded slowly, trying to convey that she wanted to help. Then, Emma began to act out different scenarios, pointing in various directions and watching the woman's face for recognition. When Emma pointed toward the main street and mimicked someone falling down, the woman's eyes lit up with relief. She nodded vigorously and grabbed Emma's small hand. Together they rushed around the corner where an elderly man lay unconscious on the sidewalk, his breathing shallow. The woman immediately knelt beside him, checking his pulse while Emma ran to the nearest shop to get help. Within minutes, paramedics arrived and were working on the man. The woman in the uniform kept signing rapidly to Emma, who still couldn't understand the words but felt the gratitude radiating from every gesture. As the ambulance drove away, the woman hugged Emma tightly, tears of relief now replacing those of panic. She pulled out a business card and pressed it into Emma's palm, pointing to herself and then to the card repeatedly. Emma looked at the elegant script. Maria Santos, personal assistant to Marcus Whitfield, Whitfield Enterprises. Neither Emma nor Maria noticed the black luxury sedan parked across the street, its tinted windows hiding the man who had witnessed the entire exchange. Marcus Whitfield sat in stunned silence, his usual cold demeanor cracking, as he watched a homeless child show more humanity than he had displayed in decades. He had been waiting for Maria to finish her shift, annoyed that his personal assistant had insisted on working late at her second job as a restaurant cleaner to support her sick father. Marcus had always prided himself on paying his employees well, but he had never bothered to learn why Maria needed extra income. Now, watching this ragged little girl help his assistant without expecting anything in return, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in 20 years. Shame. His phone buzzed. A text from Maria. "Emergency with Papa. Will explain tomorrow. Thank you for understanding, Mr. Whitfield." Marcus stared at the message, then back at the empty street corner where the miracle had just unfolded. He had witnessed something that challenged everything he believed about human nature, about the correlation between wealth and worth. The little girl had disappeared back into the shadows, but her image burned in his mind. Those large, intelligent eyes and a face too thin for a child her age. The way she had approached Maria's distress with such mature compassion. Marcus instructed his driver to circle the block slowly. He needed to find this child, though he wasn't sure why. Something about her reminded him of someone, but the memory danced just beyond his grasp. As they drove through the alley behind the restaurant, he spotted her again, back in her hiding place behind the dumpster. She was carefully saving half of her found sandwich for later, a survival skill that spoke of too much experience with hunger. "Stop the car," Marcus whispered. He sat there for a long time, watching this child who had just changed his perspective on everything. The expensive watch on his wrist suddenly felt heavy, his designer suit uncomfortably warm despite the cold night. For the first time in decades, Marcus Whitfield began to question who he really was. But more importantly, he began to wonder about the little girl whose simple act of kindness had somehow reached through his carefully constructed walls and touched something he thought had died long ago: his conscience. As his driver finally pulled away, Marcus made a decision that would alter the course of both their lives forever. The next morning, Marcus arrived at his downtown office earlier than usual, but his mind wasn't on the quarterly reports waiting on his mahogany desk. Instead, he found himself staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, thinking about the scene he'd witnessed the night before. Maria knocked softly on his door at exactly 8 o'clock, her usual punctual self despite the previous night's emergency. She entered carrying his coffee and morning briefing, but Marcus noticed the exhaustion in her eyes. "Maria, please sit down," he said, gesturing to the leather chair across from his desk. She looked surprised but complied, setting down the coffee with practiced precision. "How is your father?" Marcus asked, the question feeling foreign on his tongue. In 5 years of employment, he had never inquired about her personal life beyond what was necessary for scheduling. Maria's hands moved in sign language as she spoke, a habit Marcus had always found mildly irritating but never addressed. "He's stable now. Thank you for asking, Mr. Whitfield. The doctors say his heart condition is manageable with proper medication, but—" "But?" Marcus prompted, leaning forward slightly. "The treatments are expensive and his insurance doesn't cover everything. That's why I work evenings at Romano's. I apologize for any inconvenience this may cause your schedule." Marcus studied her face, seeing for the first time the woman behind the efficient assistant. Maria was probably in her early 40s, with kind eyes and graying hair she kept pulled back in a neat bun. She had worked for him faithfully, never missing a day, never complaining about his demanding schedule or difficult temperament. "Maria, I need to ask you something unusual," he began carefully. "Last night when you were at Romano's, did someone help you?" Her face immediately brightened and her hands began moving more animatedly as she signed and spoke simultaneously. "Oh yes, Mr. Whitfield. There was this incredible little girl. I was so panicked about Papa. I had received a call that he had collapsed, and I couldn't make anyone understand what I was trying to say. But this child, she couldn't have been more than 7 or 8. She just understood." Maria paused, her eyes growing misty. She didn't know sign language, but she held my hands and looked right into my eyes. Then she started acting out different scenarios until she figured out what was wrong. She helped me find Papa and got help. I've never experienced such kindness from a stranger. "Tell me about this girl," Marcus said quietly. "What did she look like?" "Small for her age, very thin, with beautiful brown hair that looked like it hadn't been properly cared for in a while. Her clothes were too big and worn, but her eyes—" Maria smiled. Her eyes were so intelligent and compassionate. "Why do you ask, sir?" Marcus chose his words carefully. "I happened to be in the area and saw part of what happened. I was impressed by her kindness." That afternoon, Marcus did something unprecedented. He cleared his schedule and drove back to the restaurant district, not in his usual chauffeur-driven sedan, but in a modest rental car. He parked across from Romano's and waited. Hours passed. Marcus, a man whose time was typically worth thousands of dollars per minute, sat patiently watching the alley. He had brought a thermos of coffee and some sandwiches, though he wasn't sure why. As evening approached, he spotted her. The little girl emerged from behind a different dumpster, this one near a bakery 2 blocks away. She moved with the careful awareness of someone always watching for danger, her small frame disappearing and reappearing between shadows. Marcus followed at a distance as she made her evening rounds. He watched her check several dumpsters, always replacing the lids carefully. She stopped at a public fountain to wash her hands and face using a small piece of cloth she kept in her pocket. What struck him most was her dignity. Despite her circumstances, she carried herself with a quiet grace that reminded him of someone from his past, though he still couldn't place the memory. Near sunset, Emma settled into a doorway of a closed bookstore, arranging some cardboard she had found to create a small barrier against the wind. She pulled out the business card Maria had given her and studied it carefully, running her small fingers over the raised letters. Marcus parked nearby and approached slowly, his heart pounding in a way that had nothing to do with physical exertion. "Excuse me," he said softly. Emma looked up, her body tensing for flight. But when she saw his face, something in his expression must have reassured her because she didn't run. "I know Maria Santos," Marcus continued, showing her his own business card. "The lady you helped last night." Emma's face lit up with recognition. She nodded and pointed to Maria's card, then to Marcus's, clearly making the connection. "She told me what you did. That was very brave and kind of you." Emma smiled shyly but didn't speak. Marcus realized she might not trust adults given her situation. "Are you hungry?" he asked, producing one of the sandwiches from his coat pocket. Emma's eyes widened, but she shook her head politely despite the obvious hunger in her face. "I brought extra," Marcus lied gently. It would be a shame to waste it. After a moment's hesitation, Emma accepted the sandwich with a small "thank you," the first words he had heard her speak. As she ate, Marcus sat on the sidewalk beside her, something his younger self would have found unthinkable. "I'm Marcus," he said. "What's your name?" "Emma," she replied between small, careful bites. "That's a beautiful name. Emma, where are your parents?" Her face clouded over. "Grandma Rose went to heaven 6 months ago. She was all I had." The simple statement hit Marcus like a physical blow. This child had been surviving on the streets alone for 6 months at 7 years old. "Don't you have other family? Someone who could take care of you?" Emma shrugged, a gesture far too mature for her age. "Grandma said we didn't have anyone else. The people from the city tried to find someone, but there wasn't anybody." Marcus felt his throat tighten. What happened with the city people? "They wanted to put me in a home with other kids, but there were so many of us, and some of the older kids were mean. I ran away." Emma's voice grew smaller. "I know Grandma wouldn't want me to be somewhere scary." In that moment, Marcus Whitfield, billionaire, business mogul, man who had built an empire on cold calculation, felt his carefully constructed world begin to shift on its axis. Looking at this brave, kind, impossibly mature little girl, he saw something that terrified and amazed him in equal measure. He saw hope. He saw innocence that hadn't been destroyed by hardship. He saw the possibility of redemption for a soul he had thought was beyond saving. But most of all, in her eyes and the shape of her smile, he saw a ghostly reflection of someone he had lost long ago. Someone whose memory he had buried so deeply that it took a homeless child's kindness to bring it back to the surface. The realization, when it finally hit him, nearly knocked the breath from his lungs. Marcus stared at Emma's face in the fading daylight, his mind racing as memories he had suppressed for 20 years came flooding back. The shape of her eyes, the way she tilted her head when thinking, the delicate curve of her smile. It was impossible, yet undeniable. "Emma," he said carefully, his voice barely steady. "What was your grandmother's full name?" "Rose Emma Patterson," she replied, finishing the last bite of sandwich. "I got my name from her. She said I was her little rosebud." The world seemed to stop spinning. Patterson. Marcus gripped the edge of the doorway so tightly his knuckles went white. Rose Patterson. The name he had tried to forget for 2 decades. "Emma, did your grandmother ever mention a man named David? David Patterson?" Emma's face brightened. "That was my grandpa. But he died before I was born. Grandma said he was the kindest man in the world, but he got sick when he was young." Marcus closed his eyes, fighting against the tide of memory threatening to overwhelm him. David Patterson, his best friend since childhood, his business partner, the man he had betrayed in the cruelest way possible. 23 years ago, Marcus and David had started Whitfield Enterprises together with nothing but ambition, and a shared dream. They had been inseparable, like brothers, building their technology company from a cramped garage to a small but promising firm. Then came the Hartwell contract, a deal worth $50 million that would have made both their careers. But Marcus had been young, hungry, and ultimately selfish. When Robert Hartwell expressed concerns about having two equal partners, Marcus had made a choice that haunted him ever since. He had secretly restructured the company paperwork, removing David as an equal partner and making him merely an employee. When David discovered the betrayal, the confrontation had been devastating. "How could you do this to me, Marcus?" David's voice echoed in his memory. "We were supposed to be partners, we were supposed to be brothers." Marcus had justified it then, telling himself it was just business, that David would understand eventually, that success would heal all wounds. But David had left the company, taking with him not just his talent, but his trust, his friendship, and ultimately his share of the fortune that would follow. The Hartwell contract had been the foundation of Marcus's empire. Every dollar he had earned since then had been built on that initial betrayal. David had struggled for years to start his own company, but without the Hartwell connection, he never achieved the success that should have been his. Marcus had heard through mutual acquaintances that David had married a woman named Rose, that they were happy despite not having much money. He had also heard, years later, that David had died young from a heart condition, likely made worse by financial stress. Marcus had attended the funeral from afar, consumed by guilt but too proud to approach Rose and offer help. Now, looking at Emma, David's granddaughter, Marcus felt the full weight of his choices crashing down on him. "Emma," he said, his voice hoarse, "tell me about your mother." "Mama died when I was 3, Emma said matter-of-factly. "Grandma Rose said she was very sick. It was just me and Grandma after that." "And your father?" Emma shrugged. "Grandma said he wasn't ready to be a daddy, so he left when I was little. She said some people need more time to grow up." Marcus's heart ached for this child who spoke of such painful realities with the acceptance of someone far too young to understand life's cruelties. "Emma, I need to tell you something important," Marcus began, then stopped. How could he possibly explain to a 7-year-old that he was responsible for her family's poverty? That his betrayal of her grandfather had set in motion the chain of events that led to her current situation? Instead, he made a different choice. "Emma, how would you feel about coming home with me tonight? Just for tonight. You could have a warm bed, a hot meal, and a bath." Emma studied his face with those impossibly wise eyes. "Are you going to try to send me back to the scary place with all the kids?" "No," Marcus said firmly. "I promise you, I will never send you anywhere you don't want to go." "Will Maria be there? The nice lady?" Marcus smiled despite his emotional turmoil. "Maria doesn't live with me, but she works for me. You could see her again." After a long moment, Emma nodded. "Okay, but just for tonight." As Marcus led Emma to his rental car, his mind was already racing with plans. He would hire the best lawyers money could buy to arrange proper custody. He would give her everything David's granddaughter deserved: education, security, love. But first he had to face the most difficult truth of his life, that his fortune, his success, his entire empire had been built on the betrayal of the very family this child represented. As they drove through the Chicago streets toward his penthouse, Emma pressed her face to the window, watching the city lights blur past. She had no idea that the man beside her was about to turn both their worlds upside down. Marcus glanced at her in the rearview mirror and made a silent promise to David's memory. He would spend the rest of his life making amends for his past sins, starting with the granddaughter who had unknowingly shown him the way back to his humanity. The greatest irony wasn't lost on him. It had taken David's granddaughter's simple act of kindness to reveal the path to his redemption. In helping Maria, Emma had unknowingly begun to heal a 20-year-old wound that Marcus thought would never stop bleeding. But the real test was yet to come. Because tomorrow Marcus would have to begin the impossible task of building a bridge across decades of guilt, regret, and buried love. And he would have to do it while protecting Emma from the harsh truth about her family's history, with the man who was now her guardian. The little girl who had changed everything was about to change everything again. Marcus's penthouse apartment occupied the entire top floor of Chicago's prestigious Lakeshore Tower. As the private elevator opened directly into his living space, Emma stepped into a world she had only seen in magazines found in dumpsters. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of Lake Michigan, its dark waters dotted with lights from distant boats. The furniture was modern and expensive. Leather sofas, marble tables, and artwork that cost more than most people's homes. But what struck Emma most wasn't the luxury, it was the emptiness. Despite its size and grandeur, the apartment felt hollow, like a beautiful museum where no one actually lived. "Are you hungry?" Marcus asked, watching Emma's wide-eyed reaction to her surroundings. "Always," Emma replied with honest simplicity that made Marcus's chest tighten. He led her to the kitchen, a masterpiece of granite and stainless steel that looked barely used. Opening the refrigerator revealed mostly takeout containers and expensive wine. "I'm afraid I don't cook much," Marcus admitted. "But I can order something or—" "I can cook," Emma said quietly. "Grandma Rose taught me. Do you have eggs and bread?" Marcus stared at this 7-year-old offering to prepare her own meal in his $1 million kitchen. "Emma, you're my guest. You don't need to cook." "I like cooking," she said simply. "Grandma said it's how we show love." 20 minutes later, Marcus found himself eating the most perfect scrambled eggs he had ever tasted, prepared by a homeless child in his pristine kitchen. Emma had found spices he didn't even know he owned, and had created something magical from the simplest ingredients. "These are incredible," he said, meaning every word. Emma smiled, a real smile that transformed her entire face. Grandma's secret was to add a tiny bit of milk and cook them really slow. She said good things take time. After dinner, Marcus showed Emma to the guest room, but not before she had insisted on washing the dishes. "Grandma said we always clean up after ourselves no matter where we are." The guest room was larger than the entire apartment Emma had shared with her grandmother. It had its own bathroom with a marble bathtub, fluffy towels, and expensive soaps that smelled like flowers. "Emma," Marcus said as she stood in the doorway, looking overwhelmed. "Tomorrow we need to talk about some important things. About your future, about making sure you're safe and taken care of." "Are you going to send me away?" she asked, the vulnerability in her voice nearly breaking his heart. "Never," Marcus said firmly. "But we need to make things official, legal, so that no one can ever take you away from somewhere safe again." That night, Emma fell asleep in the softest bed she had ever known, while Marcus sat in his study, staring at a photograph he hadn't looked at in 20 years. It showed him and David at their college graduation, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning at the camera with the confident optimism of youth. "I'm so sorry, David," he whispered to the image. "I'm so sorry for everything." The next morning brought challenges Marcus hadn't anticipated. Emma woke before dawn, as she had trained herself to do on the streets, and was sitting by the window watching the sunrise when he found her. "Did you sleep well?" he asked. "The bed was too soft," she said honestly, "and too quiet. On the street there are always sounds, cars, people, sirens. Here it's so quiet it's scary." Marcus realized that comfort was relative, and that Emma's adjustment to normal life would be more complex than simply providing material things. Over breakfast, Emma insisted on making pancakes from scratch. She asked the question he had been dreading. "Marcus, why are you helping me? You don't even know me." He chose his words carefully. "Sometimes people cross our paths for a reason, Emma. When I saw how you helped Maria, I knew you were special. And I think your grandmother would want someone to look out for you." "Did you know my grandma?" Emma asked, tilting her head in that familiar way that reminded him so much of David. "Not directly," Marcus said, which was technically true. "But I knew she raised an extraordinary granddaughter." The doorbell interrupted them. Marcus checked his security monitor and saw Maria standing in the hallway, holding a small bag. "Maria!" Emma exclaimed when the door opened, running to hug the woman who had been her first connection to this new world. Maria knelt down and pulled several items from her bag: a small stuffed rabbit, some children's clothes, and a worn book. "I went to the shelter this morning," Maria explained to Marcus while signing to Emma. I asked if anyone had brought in belongings of a little girl. They had these in storage. Emma's eyes filled with tears as she clutched the stuffed rabbit. This is Mr. Hopscotch. Grandma made him for me when I was little. I thought I lost him forever. The book was a collection of fairy tales, its pages worn soft from countless readings. Emma opened it reverently, and Marcus saw handwritten notes in the margins, messages from Grandma Rose. She used to read to me every night, Emma whispered. Even when we didn't have electricity, she would read by candlelight. Marcus watched this reunion with Emma's treasures and felt another piece of his heart crack open. These simple items, a homemade toy, a used book, clothes that had been mended multiple times, represented more love than all his expensive possessions combined. That afternoon, Marcus made a series of phone calls that would change both their lives. His first call was to Sarah Mitchell, the best family lawyer in Chicago. "Marcus, this is highly unusual," Sarah said during their meeting later that day. "Emergency custody arrangements typically require extensive background checks, home studies, and court proceedings that can take months." "Sarah, I don't have months. This child has been living on the streets. Every day she's in the system is another day she's at risk. I understand your urgency, but why you? You're a single man with no experience with children. The courts will ask questions." Marcus had prepared for this. "I'm financially capable of providing for her. I have excellent references, and most importantly, I'm committed to giving her the stability she needs." What he didn't tell Sarah was the truth about his connection to Emma's family. That secret felt too raw, too complex to explain to anyone else yet. Sarah studied him carefully. "Marcus, I've known you for 10 years. You've never shown interest in family or children. What's really going on here?" "Maybe I'm ready to change," Marcus said quietly. "Maybe this child showed me something about myself that I'd forgotten." The legal process began immediately. Sarah filed emergency custody papers, citing Emma as an abandoned minor in need of immediate protection. Marcus's wealth and reputation expedited the process, but there were still hurdles. The most significant came when Emma had to be interviewed by a social worker. Marcus waited anxiously in the hallway while Emma met with Mrs. Catherine Wells, a woman with 30 years of experience in child welfare. "Emma seems remarkably well adjusted for a child who's experienced such trauma," Mrs. Wells told Marcus afterward. "She speaks very highly of you, which is unusual. Most children in her situation are wary of new adults." "She's an exceptional child," Marcus replied. "Indeed. But Mr. Whitfield, I have to ask, what are your long-term intentions? Are you prepared for the reality of raising a child? The sleepless nights, the teenage years, the everyday challenges of parenthood?" Marcus thought of Emma making breakfast in his kitchen, her small hands working with practiced efficiency. He thought of her insisting on washing dishes, her determination to contribute even in her vulnerability. "Mrs. Wells, that little girl has been taking care of herself on the streets for 6 months. She's shown more resilience and wisdom than most adults I know. I think the question isn't whether I'm prepared for her, it's whether I'm worthy of her trust." Mrs. Wells smiled for the first time in their conversation. "That's exactly the right answer, Mr. Whitfield." 3 days later, Marcus received temporary custody of Emma Patterson, with a court date scheduled in 30 days for permanent arrangements. That evening, as Emma fell asleep in what was now officially her room, Marcus sat beside her bed reading from the fairy tale book. When he reached the story of a poor girl who becomes a princess, Emma's sleepy voice interrupted him. "Marcus?" "Yes, sweetheart." "Do you think Grandma Rose can see me now? Do you think she knows I'm safe?" Marcus felt tears threatening for the first time in decades. "I think she can see you, Emma, and I think she's very proud of the brave, kind girl she raised." "Good," Emma whispered, clutching Mr. Hopscotch. "I want her to know I remember everything she taught me." As Emma drifted off to sleep, Marcus continued reading, but his mind was elsewhere. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new questions from Emma about her past, and inevitably, more difficult conversations about her future. But tonight, for the first time in 20 years, Marcus Whitfield felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Protecting David's granddaughter wasn't just his penance, it was his privilege. The hardest part was yet to come, because eventually, Emma would be old enough to ask the difficult questions about her family's history. And when that day came, Marcus would have to decide whether to tell her the truth about her grandfather's best friend, the man who had betrayed him and who was now trying to make amends by loving his granddaughter. 2 weeks into their new life together, Emma had transformed Marcus's sterile penthouse into something resembling a home. Her drawings decorated the refrigerator, children's books filled a corner of his study, and the sound of her laughter echoed through rooms that had been silent for decades. But it was Emma's questions that challenged Marcus the most. "Marcus, were you ever married?" she asked one morning while they prepared breakfast together, a ritual that had become sacred to both of them. "No, sweetheart, I was always too focused on work." "Don't you get lonely?" The question hit deeper than she could know. "I used to think I didn't, but maybe I just got used to it." Emma considered this with the seriousness she brought to all important matters. Grandma Rose said being alone and being lonely are different things. She said you can be surrounded by people and still be lonely if they don't really see you. Marcus paused in whisking eggs, struck by the wisdom of his grandmother's words filtered through Emma's innocent delivery. "Your grandmother sounds like she was very smart." She was. She knew about feelings and people. She said that's why Grandpa David loved her so much, because she could see into people's hearts. Every mention of David felt like a small knife turning in Marcus's chest. "Tell me more about your grandfather." Emma's face lit up as it always did when discussing family. Grandma said he was funny and kind, but also very sad sometimes. She said he got hurt by someone he trusted and it made him sick inside. Marcus nearly dropped the whisk. "Sick inside?" "Not sick like a cold. Sick like when your heart breaks and then your body gets sick too. Grandma said disappointment can make your body stop working right." The clinical assessment was devastating in its childish simplicity. David had died of a heart condition, but Marcus now understood the deeper truth. His betrayal had contributed to his best friend's death. "Emma," Marcus said carefully, "did your grandmother ever tell you who hurt your grandfather?" Emma shook her head. "She said some stories are too sad to share with little girls. But she said forgiveness was important, even when people hurt us badly." That afternoon, while Emma napped, Marcus made a decision that had been building for days. He drove to Graceland Cemetery on Chicago's north side, to a modest grave he had visited only once before, the day of David's funeral. The headstone was simple granite. David Michael Patterson, beloved husband and father. Marcus knelt in the damp grass, feeling the weight of 20 years of guilt pressing down on him. "David, I know you probably can't forgive me, and I don't deserve it anyway, but your granddaughter, she's extraordinary. She's everything good about you and Rose, and somehow she ended up with me." The wind rustled through the old oak trees, the only response to his confession. "I'm trying to do right by her, but I don't know how to be what she needs. I don't know how to be a father when I destroyed the only real friendship I ever had." Marcus pulled out his phone and showed the gravestone a picture he had taken that morning, Emma laughing as she tried to flip a pancake that was too big for the pan. "She makes me laugh, David. I didn't even remember I could laugh until she came into my life. She's teaching me things about love and kindness that I thought I'd lost forever." A groundskeeper approached, and Marcus quickly stood embarrassed to be caught talking to a gravestone. "Excuse me, sir," the elderly man said gently. I couldn't help but notice. "Did you know Mr. Patterson?" Marcus hesitated. "We were old friends." The groundskeeper smiled. "He has another visitor who comes regularly. A young woman, his daughter. She brings flowers and always tells him about his granddaughter." Marcus's heart stopped. "His daughter?" "Yes, sir. Sarah Patterson. Well, Sarah Martinez now. She moved back to Chicago about 6 months ago. Said she finally got clean and wanted to be closer to her father's memory." Emma's mother was alive. The drive back to the penthouse was a blur. Marcus's mind raced with implications, fears, and possibilities. Emma believed her mother was dead. That's what Rose had told her. But if Sarah was alive and in recovery? That evening, Emma noticed his distraction immediately. "Are you sad about something?" she asked as they sat together reading before bedtime. "Not sad exactly. Just thinking about some complicated things." Emma climbed into his lap, something that still amazed him with its casual trust. Grandma Rose said when things are complicated, we should ask ourselves what love would do. Marcus hugged her gently. What would love do, you think? Love would tell the truth even if it's scary, but love would also protect people from getting hurt if they're not ready for the truth yet. The wisdom in her words was staggering. At 7 years old, Emma had articulated the exact dilemma he faced, not just about her mother, but about his own history with her grandfather. That night, after Emma was asleep, Marcus hired a private investigator to find Sarah Martinez. Within 24 hours, he had her address, employment information, and most importantly, confirmation that she had been clean for 8 months and was working as a counselor at a rehabilitation center. The decision of whether to contact her consumed him for days. On one hand, Emma deserved to know her mother was alive. On the other hand, their current stability felt fragile and precious. The choice was made for him when his doorman called on a Thursday afternoon. Mr. Whitfield, there's a young woman here asking about a child named Emma Patterson. She says she's the child's mother. Marcus's blood turned to ice. Send her up. Sarah Martinez was thin but healthy looking, with Emma's brown hair and the same intelligent eyes. She clutched a small bouquet of daisies and looked terrified but determined. Mr. Whitfield, I'm Sarah Martinez, formerly Patterson. I believe you have my daughter. Marcus studied her face, seeing Emma's features reflected in an adult version marked by struggle and recovery. Emma believes you're dead, he said quietly. Sarah's composure cracked. My mother told her that to protect her from the truth about my addiction. But I've been clean for 8 months and I've found work helping other people in recovery. I want my daughter back. Marcus felt his carefully constructed world beginning to crumble again. Sarah, Emma has been through tremendous trauma. She's finally stable, finally feeling safe. You can't just... She's my daughter, Sarah interrupted, tears flowing freely. I know I made terrible mistakes, but I'm her mother. I have legal rights. As if summoned by the universe's cruel sense of timing, Emma emerged from her room where she had been napping. Marcus, who's visiting? She asked sleepily, then stopped dead when she saw Sarah. For a moment, mother and daughter stared at each other across the vast living room. Then Emma whispered the word that changed everything. Mama. Sarah dropped to her knees as Emma ran across the room and threw herself into her mother's arms, both of them crying and laughing simultaneously. Marcus watched this reunion with a mixture of joy and devastation. He was witnessing a miracle, a family being restored. But he was also losing the daughter he had just learned to love. I thought you were in heaven with Grandma Rose. Emma sobbed into her mother's shoulder. I wanted to be with you every day, baby girl, every single day. But I was sick, and I had to get better so I could take care of you properly. Emma pulled back to study her mother's face. Are you better now? I'm much better, and I'm never going to leave you again. Marcus cleared his throat softly. Emma, why don't you show your mother your room while I make some tea? As they disappeared down the hallway, Marcus sank into his chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was happening. He had found his redemption in caring for Emma, but now that redemption was walking away. But as he listened to Emma's excited voice showing her mother around what had become her safe haven, Marcus realized something profound. This wasn't about his redemption anymore. It was about what was best for David's granddaughter. And sometimes love meant letting go. The real test of whether he had truly changed would be determined by what he did next. Because Sarah Martinez had legal rights, but she also had a history of addiction and abandonment. Emma's safety and happiness hung in the balance. For the second time in his life, Marcus faced a choice that would define who he really was. But this time, he wouldn't be choosing between friendship and profit. He would be choosing between his own newfound happiness and the welfare of the child who had saved his soul. The difference was, this time he knew exactly what the right choice looked like. The conversation that would determine Emma's future took place after she had fallen asleep that night, exhausted from the emotional reunion with her mother. Sarah sat across from Marcus in his study, both of them speaking in whispers to avoid waking the child who meant everything to both of them. I know what you must think of me, Sarah began, her hands trembling slightly around her teacup. A mother who abandoned her child, who let addiction destroy her family. Marcus studied her face, looking for signs of deception or instability. What he saw instead was genuine remorse and the hard-won wisdom that comes from fighting personal demons and winning. "Tell me about the last 8 months," he said quietly. Sarah took a shaky breath. "After Mama died, I hit rock bottom. I knew Emma was in the system, but I also knew I couldn't take care of her in the state I was in. I checked myself into a long-term rehabilitation program in California." She pulled out her phone and showed him photos. Images of her progression through recovery, certificates from treatment programs, letters of recommendation from counselors. "I've been clean for 247 days, she said precisely. "I attend meetings every day, I have a sponsor, and I've been working as a peer counselor for 3 months. I have an apartment, steady income, and a support system." Marcus looked at the documentation, impressed despite himself by the thoroughness of her recovery efforts. "Sarah, I believe you're committed to staying clean. But Emma has been traumatized. She spent 6 months on the streets believing she had no one. She's finally feeling safe and stable." "I know," Sarah whispered, tears falling. "When I found out what happened after Mama died, that Emma had been living on the streets, I wanted to die from the guilt. But my sponsor helped me understand that guilt doesn't help anyone. Action does." She leaned forward, her voice intense but controlled. "Mr. Whitfield, I don't want to disrupt her life. I can see how much you care about her, and how much she trusts you. But I'm her mother, and I've fought too hard to get my life back to walk away now." Marcus set down his tea and made a decision that surprised even himself. "Sarah, I want to propose something unconventional, something that puts Emma's needs first." Over the next hour, they worked out an arrangement that would have seemed impossible just weeks earlier. Sarah would move into the guest wing of Marcus's penthouse, allowing Emma to maintain the stability she had found while rebuilding her relationship with her mother. Marcus would continue to provide financial support and educational opportunities, while Sarah re-established her parental role. "This is incredibly generous," Sarah said, wiping away tears. "But why? Why would you do this for us?" Marcus looked toward the hallway where Emma slept peacefully, surrounded by the love of people who would protect her. "Sarah, I need to tell you something about your father, something that might change how you feel about accepting my help." For the next 30 minutes, Marcus told Sarah the complete truth about his friendship with David, their business partnership, and his betrayal that had cost her father his rightful share of the fortune that built Whitfield Enterprises. "Your father deserved half of everything I built," Marcus concluded. "Emma helping Maria that night wasn't just coincidence. It was the universe giving me a chance to make amends to David's family." Sarah sat in stunned silence for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady but emotional. "Daddy never told me the details, but I knew someone had hurt him badly in business. Mama said it broke his heart more than it damaged his bank account. I'm so sorry, Sarah. I was young and selfish, and I destroyed the best friendship I ever had. I can't bring your father back, but I can make sure his granddaughter has everything she deserves." Sarah stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. "You know what's strange? Daddy used to say that people deserve second chances if they're truly willing to change. He said forgiveness wasn't about forgetting. It was about choosing love over resentment." She turned back to Marcus. "I think he'd be proud that his granddaughter was the one who helped you find your way back to being human." The next morning brought the conversation Marcus had been dreading, explaining to Emma how their family was about to change again. Emma listened carefully as they explained the new arrangement, her young mind processing the complex emotions and logistics. "So Mama will live here too?" she asked. "Yes, sweetheart," Sarah replied. "If that's okay with you." Emma looked between the two adults who had become her world. "And Marcus will still be here?" "I'll be here as long as you want me here," Marcus said solemnly. Emma was quiet for a long moment, then asked the question that revealed her deepest fear. "Promise you won't leave me again?" Sarah knelt down and took her daughter's hands. "Emma, I can't promise that nothing bad will ever happen, because life is unpredictable, but I can promise that I will never choose to leave you again. And if something happens that's out of my control, you'll always have Marcus to keep you safe." Marcus nodded, understanding the weight of the commitment he was making. "Always, Emma. You'll always have a home with me." Emma studied both their faces, then surprised them with her response. "Can we still make breakfast together every morning, all three of us?" 6 months later, the unconventional family had settled into a rhythm that worked for everyone. Sarah had completed her college degree in social work while living in the penthouse, and was now managing a recovery program for mothers trying to reunite with their children. Emma thrived with the love and attention of two devoted adults. She attended the best private school in Chicago, took piano lessons, and had developed a particular talent for mathematics that reminded Marcus of her grandfather's analytical mind. On a warm spring evening, as they sat together on the terrace watching the sunset over Lake Michigan, Emma made an announcement that caught both adults off guard. "I know you were Grandpa David's friend," she said to Marcus matter-of-factly. Marcus's heart stopped. "What makes you say that, sweetheart?" "I found a picture in one of Grandma Rose's books. You and Grandpa when you were young. You both looked happy." Sarah and Marcus exchanged glances. They had planned to tell Emma the truth when she was older, but apparently 7-year-olds were more observant than they had anticipated. "Yes," Marcus said simply. "We were very close friends." "What happened?" Emma asked with the directness that defined her personality. Marcus chose his words carefully. "We had a disagreement about business, and I made some choices that hurt our friendship. I've regretted it ever since." Emma considered this. "But now you're taking care of me, so maybe Grandpa David forgives you." The simplicity of her logic was devastating and healing at the same time. "I hope so, Emma. I really hope so." That night, after Emma was asleep, Marcus and Sarah sat together reviewing college applications. Emma had expressed interest in attending law school someday, saying she wanted to help children who didn't have families. "She's going to change the world," Sarah said, looking at her daughter's test scores and teacher recommendations. "She already changed mine," Marcus replied. As he prepared for bed, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought them all together. A homeless child's simple act of kindness had led to the healing of a 20-year-old wound, the restoration of a family, and the transformation of a man who had thought himself beyond redemption. Emma Patterson, David's granddaughter, Sarah's daughter, and now his adopted family, had proven that love could indeed conquer the worst mistakes, if someone was brave enough to accept the gift of forgiveness. The little girl who had helped a deaf woman in an alley had unknowingly orchestrated the most important merger of Marcus Whitfield's career, the merger of his broken heart with the family he had never known he needed. And every morning as they made breakfast together and planned their days, Marcus was reminded that the greatest fortunes weren't built in boardrooms or measured in dollars. They were built in small moments of kindness, one perfect scrambled egg at a time.